Now, there's so many issues to unpack here after that briefing. What will be the impact on the pupils in both the short and long term? And where does this leave our education system going forward? Let's get some reaction now from Teachers Union, Sadtu spokesperson, or rather we don't have her, but we have Naptosa's executive director, Basil Manuel, as well as UJ education expert, Professor Mary Metcalfe. Thank you both so much for joining us here on eNCA. Now, what we found out today are things that we probably thought we knew. And Professor Metcalfe, I'm going to start with you. 80% of learning lost in 2020, a ripple effect maybe into 2021, of course.
We need to stop thinking about short-term ripple effects and understand that this is a long-term problem that isn't going to be catching up a day or two here. Professor Gustafsson said that we have to start thinking about the impact of this learning loss on the matriculants in 10 years' time. I really want to congratulate the DBE for how they handled this press conference and the very careful work that they're doing, examining learning loss and understanding that it's not just what teachers have managed to rush through, but it's what's been learnt that matters. And I hope that this translates into greater support for teachers to be responsive through assessment to what learners learn. And I think the basis for that has been clearly set. Teachers need more support long-term, focusing particularly in the primary schools on consolidating numeracy and literacy so that we can build a solid base for learning.
And Mr. Manuel, coming to you, the fact that there's been 54% that was lost last year in terms of time with teachers. Of course, we know that disadvantaged backgrounds, rural areas, for instance, online learning was a myth for them. But also we heard at the same time the kind of work that teachers are doing to work overtime so they meet the expectation of the curriculum. And I just want to find out from you what teachers are saying about fatigue.
Masego, one of the things that we've missed out on a lot is actually acknowledging just what the impact is on human beings. There are children suffering from stress, untold and undocumented. There are teachers that are falling apart because of the varying roles that teachers have to play. So, yes, it's a stressful time. But of course, in any group in a community, you have those that are more resilient than others. And it is those less resilient that we need to look after first. Teachers are being looked upon as always being super resilient, and it is not true. So, yes, we are concerned about the impact of all the many things piled on teachers. But let me say, the acknowledgement is a necessary part of that mental health healing, because people need to know that they are acknowledged, that they are valued. And I want to also say that I'm pleased that there has been so much acknowledgement of the teachers. But going forward, I think, as Professor Metcalfe has said, we need to now put shoulders to the wheel in terms of how we resource, how we look at the curriculum, because maybe we were too optimistic to believe that we could retain all the learning areas in a curriculum in a pressurized time like this, especially at the foundation phase, when the important thing has to be the ability to read, the ability to do math, and so on. So it gives us an opportunity, and we mustn't always look at it as only bad things happening. There are opportunities created by the very crisis that we are going through.
And Professor Metcalfe, I mean, I think, the gentleman who spoke there about these statistics, who told us about what they looked at and how much time pupils and teachers have lost, he actually said at some point that it's virtually impossible to recover learning losses. So are we doomed? What do we do now?
We cannot accept that we're doomed. What we need to do is to be very focused on what needs to happen and who are our key resources to catch up the learning time. And I agree with Basil Manuel that we need to trim not only little topics out of the curriculum, but we need to have a long-term plan, more than 3 years. We need to have a 5-year plus plan to support teachers to use the curriculum guidelines as a guideline where they focus on supporting their learners to learn. And again, I agree with Basil that the issue of the amazing commitment that teachers have shown across the country has to be acknowledged. We have to thank them. We have to support them better. So the issue of job has to be seen as a long-term goal. And I'm glad that the Minister has stayed with the current timetable, because the idea of taking 1 or 2 days here or there doesn't solve the long-term problem. The long-term problem is more flexible curriculum planning that focuses on what learners learn rather than what teachers teach, and understanding that we're preparing learners for subsequent years of learning.
So, Prof, I guess the pandemic, just like Mr. Manuel was saying, there's not really a lot of bad. Of course, there's some bad and anxiety that it's caused, but it's also shown us some things that need to change. But also I wanted to go back to the professor, the fact that he quoted the World Health Organization in saying that it would be better to close businesses and leave schools open. It says that that's more effective. So if we hear that the president is going to speak to us again and we hear that numbers are going up, would you say schools should remain open? I mean, there's also the statistic that they gave us about the fact that rotational learning is also is also quite problematic at the moment. So should the schools remain open?
They must remain open and be safe. They must maximize all of the COVID protocols, including physical distancing and ventilation, but we need responses that are context dependent, which understand that there's different levels of infection, different levels of anxiety, and that schools can make decisions which they are able to substantiate professionally. Schools are the safest places for children to be when the alternative is often the street in an unsupervised way. We also know that COVID risk increases with age. So if schools are practicing safety in terms of the COVID requirements, our teachers are vaccinated, I would love to see schools remaining open and being safe. I think the point that the UN is making has to be underscored, that the losses of learning can result in what they call a generational catastrophe. We must stop looking for short-term, quick-fix solutions and understand this pandemic is unlike anything that's ever happened before. We go about our lives trying to live normally, but actually our adjustments in terms of schooling in particular have to be long-term, and they have to be teacher-focused.
Mr. Manuel, we also found out from the press conference that the problematic provinces are the Eastern Cape and the Free State in terms of attendance. Do we know as a union, do you know what's going on in those provinces? I mean, the Eastern Cape has always been problematic in terms of services delivered to schools. We know that it's got a lot of rural area, so that means more people in the Eastern Cape have less opportunity. But what's happening there in terms of attendance? Why are we seeing such less attendance?
Masego, the one thing that we have to accept is that there will always be a drop-off when we have learners not attending school all the time, because you're tracking and tracing them less often, you are in contact with their parents less often. However, in the two specific provinces, you've already alluded to the rurality of the Eastern Cape. However, in the very report that Dr. Gustafsson was making reference to, it is also acknowledged that these figures can only be verified when once learners return to school full-time, because research is done on a sample basis. And the full extent and the real extent of whether non-attendance now is actually translating into completely dropping out of school still has to be tested. So whilst the research is credible and it causes a lot of concern, we also want to say that we live in eternal hope that when we do get to a point where we can bring everybody back safely, and as Mary said, ensure that the safety measures are in place, we will see many of those returning. We know that poverty and the return to school are directly linked because the poorer child doesn't always return. But COVID-19 is punishing us on those fronts in particular because the poorer child will suffer more. And that is why we've got to look very carefully. And even when we talk about the impact of COVID on learners, remember the closing words of Professor Gustafsson on that particular chapter was that the World Health Organization has said these things, and Mary's right. Naptosa has always agreed that the safest place for children is in school, but it was said also in the context of reduced class sizes. These are the problems we have to tackle, the long-term problems. Mary's been at pains to point out that it is not a quick fix solution. We've got to look at the long-term problems, like overcrowding, etc., and how, by addressing that, we sustain schools in a very, very different way in the long term.
Let me also introduce Nomusa Cembi. She is joining us. She's the spokesperson of Sadtu. Sis Nomusa, thank you very much for your time on eNCA. Let me come to you then. You know, the minister started off at some point by talking about the pass rate from the June exams. She says that it's, you know, it's a good pass rate. Do you agree?
Yes, I would say I would agree because everybody was expecting, you know, things to go for worse. And we are happy with the fact that in those we saw an increased number of passes in the critical subjects of mathematics and science. So, judging by where we've been in terms of COVID and all the disruptions that have taken place, one can say this was quite a good mark because we're not expecting to reach such high marks.
Has Sadtu, for instance, heard anything about school dropouts increasing during this time? We heard, for instance, Mr. Manuel was answering my question about the Eastern Cape and the Free State and the lack of attendance there. School dropouts, how's that looking?
It is difficult for one to say that these are school dropouts because we are having a problem of rotational learning and all that. So one cannot conclude or one say conclusively that these are dropouts because kids are coming in and out of school on a rotational basis. Perhaps after or at the end of the year, one can relook at this and say definitely these are dropouts. But at the moment, it is hard to say because of the way learning is taking place, learners coming in not all at the same time, but coming in on a rotational basis.
While I still have you, Ms. Nomusa, they did also say during the press conference that rotational learning is proving to be problematic. They're saying that it's not going to work because pupils are losing 2 days of learning every week. So I asked Professor Metcalfe earlier if she thinks schools should remain open even if we see another insurgency, hopefully not, in South Africa. And she believes schools should remain open. But the other issue is this rotational learning part, but it also goes to schools who, for instance, have more than 50 pupils in a class.
Yes, I would say rotational learning is proving to be quite a problem, in that teachers, you know, when kids go home, they forget what they've learned, and you find that teachers are frustrated in that they have to repeat one and the same thing more than once because learners tend to forget. If you tell them something and then they only come back the next week or 2 days after. So meaning that is made as teachers have got to repeat. On the issue of all learners coming back, we would want to see every learner going back to school on a full-time basis. However, we would want that to happen under safe conditions. If the department can do all its best to ensure that the environment is safe for learning to take place. There is efficient social distancing. Class sizes are reduced so that there can be distance.
Social distancing.
Yes, social distancing is taking place. We won't have a problem. We want all learners to be at school, but we are saying schooling should take place under safe conditions.
Of course, thank you very much to the three of you for your time. I think what I've learned today is that the pandemic has definitely taught us that there are things that need to be shifted. There's some negative, but there's some positive in the learnings, and we need to change a few things very quickly in order for these kids to be able to get their education back long term. As Professor Metcalfe said, we need to stop looking at the short term, but look at long-term solutions. Thank you very much for your time, all three of you. Professor Mary Metcalfe, she's an educational specialist at the University of Johannesburg. We also had a spokesperson of Sadtu, Nomusa Cembi, as well as Basil Manuel, also from the National Professional Teachers Organization of South Africa, Naptosa in short. Thank you very much to the three of them for their time.